Hey guys, welcome to Motoroids. My name is Amit. This is the Royal Enfield Hunter 350. We are in Bangkok, Thailand, and today I'm going to let you know everything that probably you'll not get to learn anywhere else in this review. So stay tuned if you want to know every single thing about this motorcycle. Now, before we get started with everything, I need to let you know as to what this motorcycle is. We have already given you a brief walk around of this bike and probably you know a few things about it already, but since the opinion was embargoed, I'm going to start with the performance part first. And to understand that, you need to understand how this motorcycle is different from the other two motorcycles with the J series engine, that is the Meteor and the classic 350. Now, some changes have been made, and the primary part of the equation is the suspension, the rake angle, the engine, the chassis, and where this motorcycle wants to be. So let's talk about all those changes, the essential changes one by one. And this engine basically is the same block as the other two motorcycles. It's the same engine, but the fueling and the ignition here is a little different, the mapping is a little different, and it's essentially to make it a little bit more rev happy, a little bit more intent than the other two motorcycles. So the character of this engine is more sprightly by design. The other thing is the sharpness and the agility, and that has been achieved by a sharper rake angle. So it's been pushed closer to the rear, and now this rake angle is 25 degrees as opposed to 26.8 degrees on the Meteor and 26 degrees on the classic 350. So the turn-ins are sharper, and this motorcycle is more agile. So that is another change that has been made. And the third part is with the visuals, and to make it look less intimidating and smaller, since this is a roadster, what Royal Enfield had to do was make the chassis more compact, and to achieve that they could not have done with the existing airbox and air filter, so they changed that as well, and the chassis was shrunk a little bit. That was primarily for the visual purposes. And then finally, since this motorcycle is supposed to be more agile, it has to have slightly firmer suspension, which is like completely retuned. So the suspension was also completely overhauled, and if you go to see, the classic has a multi-rated spring system here, but this one has a constant gap. So the suspension both up front and at the rear has been completely overhauled. So technically speaking, those are the biggest changes which make this motorcycle what this is. The suspension up front is essentially the same unit looks wise, 41 mm dia, twin forks, but the componentry inside is different. The spring ratings are firmer, stiffer, and the damping force also is higher. So those are the changes. Now, with all of that in mind, let's understand how this motorcycle performs and why. Now, as I've mentioned before also, the new generation J series engine is a revelation of sorts, knowing what Royal Enfield used to be before. And it's a completely vibe-free engine with a counterbalancer. Fuel injection, it's a 2-valve SOHC unit, and similar is the case here as well. It's a completely vibe-free unit, very smooth, revs very easily. However, with the changes that I mentioned, by losing a lot of metallic parts like this fender here with a more compact chassis, losing the metal fender here, and overall lesser dimensions, it is 14 kgs lighter in this metro format, even lighter in the retro format as compared to the classic 350. So along with the more sprightly feeling engine and the lesser weight and the better chassis, this motorcycle feels livelier. And while that may come across as a pro to you, as a USP to you, when you really want this motorcycle to go so fast, such that it can keep up with the strengths of the chassis, sometimes you feel wanting for more power. And unfortunately, this engine is a long stroke engine, so it's not a very sporty, very revvy engine. So we have not seen anyone indulge in red light GPs or traffic signal GPs with a Royal Enfield, but with this motorcycle you'd want to be ahead of the pack. And when that happens, you want to go off the block, you'd realize that that initial spurt, that fast revving engine is not there. So what I'm trying to say here is that although Royal Enfield have done a beautiful job with the chassis and the suspension, with the engine still being the same, just the tuning doesn't really make it the amazingly sporty motorcycle that it probably could have been. It's only a praise because they have done a fantastic job with the same engine that they could have done. So this motorcycle is a lot more fun than the other two motorcycles, and if you really want to be taking it around corners within the Royal Enfield framework and with that engine, it does really well. In terms of performance, if I compare it with the Meteor, with which it has more similarities than the Classic, because the Classic has a 18-inch rear wheel, which makes its performance slightly different. The gearing here is exactly the same, so it's more similar in performance with the Meteor than the RE Classic. And when I compared the gear speeds, they were exactly the same. In the first gear, this motorcycle achieves 50 km per hour. In the second gear, 75 km per hour. In the third gear, about 99 km per hour. In the fourth gear, it will achieve its top speed on the speedo of 122 km per hour. Its real true speed is about 114, 115 km per hour. But on the speedo, you'll achieve the top speed in the fourth gear. The fifth gear is an overdrive for cruising on the highways and for better fuel efficiency. And to achieve the top speed would not really be easy in the fifth gear. So in the fourth gear, you will be attaining about 122 km per hour, which is the top speed, and in the fifth gear, you will not get near that mark. These numbers are exactly identical with the Meteor, although the Classic has slightly higher numbers since the gearing is changed because of the bigger rear wheel. Now, acceleration feels quicker on this motorcycle because this is lighter and the engine also has been tuned slightly differently. Apart from that, the tractability is something which is completely mind-boggling on this motorcycle. I was expecting the Classic to have the best numbers, but it's actually this motorcycle which is the most tractable of the three. In the fifth gear, this motorcycle can actually start rolling on without any problem from as low as 25 km per hour. In the fourth gear, 20 km per hour. In the third gear, it will roll on from about 15-16 km per hour, and in the first two gears, it can easily roll on at sub 10 km per hour. In the first gear, in fact, you can just trundle along at sub 5 km per hour speed. So the tractability here is absolutely mind-blowing, and just because it looks sportier doesn't mean that it's not tractable. It's actually the most tractable of the lot. Also, the cruising speeds, 100 is something this motorcycle is completely comfortable at. It's perfectly at home at 100 km per hour. Beyond that, also the engine doesn't mind revving, but that's where a little bit of stress comes in, and it's only at the point where the limiter comes in that the engine really feels stressed out. Otherwise, this engine is completely vibe free. In terms of its fuel efficiency figures, the official number that has been shared by Royal Enfield to us is 36.5 kmpl, and in the real world that should translate to about 40 km per liter if you're driving on an open highway, and about 30-32 if you're in chock-a-block really congested traffic. Average number should be about 35-36 if it's a mix of both. So that's about the performance from an engine perspective. As I mentioned, this motorcycle is meant to be more agile, and is it? It definitely is. And a part of why such is the case is the riding position also, which as you can see has been changed. So while in the Meteor you have a foot forward kind of a position, and this foot peg is somewhere here. On the Classic, here it's rear set. Also, the handlebar is flatter, and you put your hands with a lot more weight on your arms in this position. So your weight is well distributed, and it's to my liking because I want my weight to be well distributed so that I can ride for longer. The notion that a lot of people believe in, that having the entire weight on your back and having an upright riding position is a comfortable seating position, is a myth. You need to distribute your weight so that you can ride for longer. So in that sense, I find this motorcycle very comfortable. Now the seat here has also been completely redesigned, and it tapers up front to allow for squeezing off your thighs well, so that even the shorter riders can put their legs down. I am 5 feet 10 and I can easily put my heels down with a bend in my knees. So even if you are 5 feet 5 or 5 feet 6, you should not have any problem at all. So in that sense, this is a good bike even to maneuver in tight spaces. And the other thing is that unlike the Classic, where your shins used to foul with the foot pegs, such is not the case here. This being a lighter motorcycle and with this tapered seat, as you would have seen, the Classic 350 had a wider tank. So in all of those aspects, this motorcycle is easier to maneuver with its lighter weight. The seat height is 790 mm. This is completely manageable. Now this tank is also tapering, and it's quite easy to ride it around corners with this recess. So this riding position really lends itself very well to corner carving and enthusiastic riding. Now you should understand that this is a Royal Enfield, but within that framework also it handles rather well, and the changes that have been made to the suspension really come into the element the moment you start building speeds. And with a 6-step preload adjuster at the rear set to the middle, I did not have any problems whatsoever while riding yesterday for about 110 kilometers, bang in the middle of the night and at quite high speeds. We also went to a go-kart track which was pretty tight, and this motorcycle, despite being a Royal Enfield, managed to handle those tight corners rather well, although it could have done better with a Revier engine. But putting the pegs down was not an issue. So if you really compare it with hardcore sport bikes, sure, it won't match them, but within a certain framework, I think this motorcycle works very well and is a significant improvement over the other two motorcycles in the Royal Enfield family with the J series engine. Now that lighter weight and ease of maneuverability also means that for the ladies and the shorter riders who are not very well built, this is a more accessible Royal Enfield and should get more people into the Royal Enfield family. People who want to buy the classic 350 and the Meteor are probably not going to look here because this is a very different kind of a motorcycle, but people who wanted something more sporty and were looking at other brands will probably now look at this motorcycle as well, because this is definitely a little bit more accessible. Now from a comfort perspective, I really don't think there is anything to complain about. Unless you're riding at very slow speeds on really rough surfaces, there will be a little bit of a vertical movement, but I really think that Royal Enfield have done a fantastic job of the suspension. The seat here is good for the pillion, also for short to medium journeys. It's not a very long seat, it's a compact motorcycle, so the length of the seat has been compromised a little bit, but it can definitely be used for medium journeys. The seat height is not much, so the shorter people can also swing a leg very easily and get on board without much of a problem. The grab rail here is stylish and quite functional too. Here you get this twin piece grab rail. On the retro variant you have a metallic tubular kind of a traditional grab rail. The tail lamp here is an LED unit, the blinkers are bulbs. On the retro variant you have bulb on the tail lamp as well. The seat is very comfortable, and in my personal opinion, if you want to be going touring with this motorcycle, you can ride about 200 kilometers without having to take a butt brake, and it's quite a comfortable motorcycle. Long distances can also be traveled without much of a problem. Obviously it's not designed to be a tourer, but if you really want this motorcycle and tour on it, I really believe that you can, although I really would have liked this motorcycle to have the bungee hooks or the hooks that we have on the classic 350 for more functionality for touring purposes. But this motorcycle from a comfort perspective can definitely tour. Another important question that a lot of you ask is whether this can off-road or whether it can go to the Himalayas, and in that sense, while this is a sportier motorcycle, the handlebar is not exactly inaccessible and you can actually ride the pegs and do a little bit of soft-roading. So in a nutshell, yes, it can go to the Himalayas, but it's not the most suited motorcycle. It can do a little bit of soft-roading, but it is oriented more towards the sporty side of riding. Heating is another issue that a lot of people ask, and since this exhaust is stubbier, the cat cons have been pushed forward, they are more compressed, and there is a little bit of heat emanating, but that's not something that you should be worried about. Which brings me to this exhaust. You have this heat shield here and another protection here to protect your shoes, and this maintains the classic Royal Enfield beat, although all three motorcycles, including the Meteor, the classic and this one, have their own tonality to it. And I would really want you to listen to the exhaust and let me know what you think of it. I quite like it. While you're riding it in low to mid revs, it really feels very, very beautiful, and I really believe that Royal Enfield have done a fantastic job of it. Which brings us to the instrument console and the switchgear. Before that, I need to make a mention of the mirrors also. Never been a big fan of these round headlamps. I want them to be wider so that I don't have to pull my elbows down. There are accessories which can probably be used to make them wider if you so wish, but by default these mirrors should be more comfortable, more wider. And generally earlier these mirrors used to be quite flimsy and they used to fall down, but these are sturdier, so that's a better option than the previous motorcycles, but this design should definitely be a little bit better for better visibility. The instrument console is similar to what we have seen before, and by default it doesn't come with Bluetooth connectivity, but if you have this tripper, which is an accessory, you can get turn-by-turn navigation, and it's built in association with Google. In terms of the features that you have here, you have a speedo in kilometers per hour and miles per hour. You have all the basic features, fuel gauge, you have your clock. You also have this eco indicator which comes on if you're not riding it too hard. Gear indicator, 2 trip meters, 1 odometer, and of course a fuel trip. You also have an engine overheat indicator which comes on if the engine overheats. You have the battery low indicator and the rest of the telltale lights. So all of that is there, but it doesn't have any fuel efficiency related details like distance to empty or average fuel efficiency. Now let's talk about the switchgear. Okay, before that, this I button here is used to toggle between the trips and the odo, and you have this switchgear here which is taken from the Meteor and the Classic. Not a big fan of this, but it's well made, that's a good thing, and is built to last. Could have been a little bit easier to use, but I think that's okay, just a matter of getting used to. Turn indicators, high beam, low beam, and day flasher. Horn. Here you have the engine kill switch along with the ignition. Hazard switch, and you also have this USB socket here, which is a standard fitment. So again, a great feature. Levers are not the lightest, not the hardest. After my ride for about 110 kilometers last night, I did not feel any pressure on my hands, so I guess it should not be problematic even if you're riding in stop-start traffic. Although this motorcycle does not have slip and assist clutch, which always is a fantastic thing to have, but it doesn't come with that one feature. Although Royal Enfield motorcycles are not known for very hard riding, but I'm mentioning that because other motorcycles within this segment are offering that feature. Another question that some of you might ask is whether this comes with a center stand, and yes, it does. So that does affect clearance a little bit, but that's okay for some people. That feature is required. In terms of the gear shifts, the 5 gears that we have are pretty slick shifting, and in terms of the quality of the motorcycle overall, I think that with every new model, Royal Enfield is making improvements, and the issues that I was facing in terms of gear shifts with the Classic 350 while downshifting from 4th to 3rd were absent. I did not find any glitches with the gear shifts. However, while downshifting from 2nd to 1st, I did find a little bit of clankiness sometimes, but that was occasional. So in all, the overall engine and transmission experience has improved. This is the most sprightly of the 3 motorcycles that we have with this engine, and if you really want the quickest motorcycle, something that handles really well, and also, by the way, as I mentioned, is the most tractable, this is the motorcycle to go for. However, if you want something bigger, something more substantial looking, then the other 2 motorcycles are better because this is a little bit more compact. Now the headlight here is a halogen. There is no LED element here. Even the blinkers are both bulbs, and that's a good and a bad thing because from a technology perspective it's not a very modern design, but in wet conditions the yellow light really works a lot better than the modern white light, which completely washes out, and I think in that sense this is better. And we generally don't get to test motorcycle headlights during our Meteor drives because we get to ride them only during the day, but we rode this in the night and it's an average headlight. It has a decent throw and spread, but the intensity could definitely have been better, and it's an old design. It's just about adequate. It's not the brightest of the bulbs. As I mentioned, you have the Metro and the Retro variants, and the Metro version is the more expensive and the more premium of the 2, the more modern of the 2. Metro comes with 6 colors, Retro comes with 2 colors. Metro gets dual channel ABS, Retro gets single channel ABS with drum brake at the rear. The Metro gets alloy wheels, the Retro gets spoke wheels, and the spoke wheels on the Retro are also narrower with narrower tires. So while 110 section is the front tire here, on the Retro you have a 100 section tire, at the rear you have a 140 here, there you have a 120. On the Metro you get a LED tail lamp, on the Retro you get a bulb. Obviously you get a disc on the Metro and a drum on the Retro. You get an aluminum grab rail which is covered in plastic on this one, 2-piece unit. On the Retro you get a tubular steel piece and here you get a digital analog cluster, while on the retro you get an analog unit. The flickability of the motorcycle is a lot better than the classic and the Meteor, so it's really easy to drop the bike, pick it up, and it really eggs you on to ride it harder and faster and throw it around corners. On the very tight go-kart track that we went to yesterday, it was quite easy for me to dig these foot pegs into the tar. So it has its limitation, but within the family this is the sportiest without a shade of doubt. And to someone who's not a sports bike freak, this motorcycle should be a good option. Now a big part of the equation is the tires as well, and since both front and the rear wheels themselves are wider even than the Meteor, because the tire size is the same but the wheels here are wider, so that means that you have a better contact patch, and that really means that these tires do the best job of the three motorcycles we have within the family. So in that sense, this is also the motorcycle with the grippiest tires. Although if you really want to be riding very hard around corners with the bike leaned over and power out, you do feel that the motorcycle is sliding out a little bit, and you have to understand that while these tires are adequate, they are not the stickiest of the rubbers. So if you want to up the game, which I don't really think you need to with this kind of a setup, these tires are just about adequate, but definitely not meant for racetrack use. Braking, we have also seen braking improve significantly with the new generation of Royal Enfield motorcycles, and while on the older generation motorcycles like the Himalayan, the brakes are still somewhat lacking. Here I believe that the brakes are even better than the ones on the Meteor and the classic 350. So the lighter weight is one of the reasons, and the tires are also one of the reasons. And within the urban scape, we were really going quite fast late in the night, and while riding in such conditions you have to be very, very careful, because there are some bad patches, you may have some surprises, and the motorcycle really surprised me with its braking. Although it's not as sharp as some of the sport bikes, it doesn't stop on a dime, but the brakes were more than adequate, and they were quite sufficient and confidence inspiring. Which now brings me closer to the conclusion of this review, and we should talk about the color scheme. So on the retro variant, you have two solid colors, that's white and black, and all the color schemes and the designs that you see here are not there. It's a more understated design with just the Royal Enfield logo on it. But with the Metro, you have 6 colorways, and within that also there are variations. So what you see here is the Rebel Blue variant, and you have a Rebel Red also, and both of them have this Royal branding with this two-tone finish and Royal Enfield branding here. Then you have the Rebel Black and Dapper Grey, which have the RO new kind of a branding that we have also seen on the Scram, and these two colors share the same design scheme. Then you have a different scheme in Dapper Ash, which has a small RE logo here and a very different 3 vertical lines styling element here. And finally we have the Dapper White, which has Ride written here and Royal Enfield on the other side. So these are the 6 different styles and colorways that you have on the Hunter 350. Now in terms of competition, Royal Enfield buyers are a very distinct set, and they don't generally move to different brands, but now this motorcycle has quite a few competitors, and let's talk about them. So you have the Honda 350 RS, which is the closest match. You also have the Yeezy Scrambler and the Java 42. Java 42 is not exactly a competitor, but still close. You also have the Java Roadster. And if you talk about the pricing on these motorcycles, the 350 RS from Honda is 2 lakh rupees. The Yeezy Scrambler is 2.1 to 2.14 lakh rupees. The Java 42 is less expensive at 1.94 lakh rupees. And if you really want to be talking about lesser expensive options, the TVS Ronin, which is a similar template, is a less expensive option at 1.7 to 1.72 lakh rupees with more tech and more features, but the power there is not less at all. The Royal Enfield Hunter 350 has been launched at a price of 1.49 lakh rupees for the retro variant. The Dapper series of Metro is 1.63 lakh rupees, and the Rebel series of Metro is priced at 1.68 lakh rupees ex showroom, and at that price this motorcycle is absolutely fantastic value for money. So if you like this motorcycle, there is absolutely no reason why you should not, because it really is the best value for money motorcycle in its segment. So guys, that was our in-depth review of the Royal Enfield Hunter 350, and in the way we like to do it, we cover every single aspect of the motorcycle. We don't do any flashy photography or videography. We don't shout too much, but we try to give you all the information that you need in the way you want. And if you appreciate good quality long format videos, do help us fight this new trend of making only short videos. We are going to stick to what we do best, and we are going to keep making these really exhaustive videos for you. So do like the video, subscribe to Motoroids, do share this video with your friends, and until next time, this is Amit Changani signing off. Rev hard, rev free, and rise.